All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Major updates have been rolling in all day today in regards to these negotiations between the United States and Iran. We're going to break down all the latest for you today. Donald Trump just came out on Truth Social and announced that he's basically ready to accept this MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between the two countries, which basically extends the ceasefire 60 more days to make time for nuclear negotiations. He then listed out a couple of terms, which he says are in this deal, to which Iran responded by saying these terms are not in the deal. So, as has been the case this whole time, there's major confusion as to what the terms of the deal actually are, and there are major communication gaps clearly between the two sides. So we'll talk about all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Maybe we should improve the liberty of our own country before we seek to do so abroad. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. The correct answer to this, of course, as it always is liberty. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you could please go down below this video here on YouTube and hit like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, Spotify, and Substack and giving all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that as well. Let's get into the news here. Donald Trump, as I said in the intro, put out a Truth Social post about an hour ago, basically saying that a deal is all but accepted, and he's basically implying that he's ready to accept this deal. And then in the Truth Social post, he went on to list out a couple of terms within this Memorandum of Understanding, to which Iran would go on to reply that these terms are not in the MOU. They have come out since this post and said that Trump is not telling the truth about this. But let's get it. We'll start off here by reading Trump's Truth Social post he just put out. It says, quote, Iran must agree that they will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. The Hormuz Strait must be immediately open. No tolls, for unrestricted shipping traffic in both directions. All water mines, bombs, if any, will be terminated. We have already removed through detonation numerous such mines with our great underwater minesweepers. Iran will complete the immediate removal and or detonation of any mines that are left, which will not be many. Ships caught in the strait due to our amazing and unprecedented naval blockade which will now be lifted, may start the process of heading home. Say hello to your wives, husbands, parents, and families from me, your favorite president. The enriched material, sometimes referred to as, quote, nuclear dust, which is buried deep underground with virtually collapsed mountains, caused by our powerful B-2 bomber attack 11 months ago, sitting on top of it, will be unearthed by the United States, which it is agreed is the only country, along with China, with the mechanical capability of doing so. In close coordination and conjunction with the Islamic Republic of Iran, plus the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and destroyed. No money will be exchanged until further notice. Other terms, so far less importance, have been agreed to. I will be meeting now in the Situation Room to make a final determination. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, the main takeaways from that Truth Social post is, number one, obviously, that he's saying a deal is basically imminent. He's basically implying that this deal has been totally agreed to, all the major points have been agreed to, and we're about to see him go to the Situation Room and come out announcing this deal. That's basically what he's implying there. Number two, he makes some claims here about the nuclear weapons and the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has now since come out and said are not part of the deal at all. So this is right back where we start this whole time. This has been the dynamic the entire time. If you've been reading Drop Site News, which I, again, highly encourage everybody does to stay up to date with the news of this war, they've been the best on this war the entire time. Drop Site News, Ryan Grimm, Jeremy Scahill, they've been the best this entire time. If you've been reading them, then you would know the statements coming out of the Iranian government this entire time. And the whole time, the Iranian government has been basically saying everything the administration has been putting out is just not true in terms of where the negotiations lie. This whole time, including right here, Donald Trump has been portraying the Iranians as basically ready to totally capitulate. He says that every time there's an extension in the ceasefire, it's because the Iranians begged for the extension. And negotiations were going so well that the United States just felt like they could give them the extension. That's just not the reality of what happened here. They are looking for an extension because the United States wants to get out of this and find a deal. That's the reality. The United States is not ready to go back to war. Our launchers and our missile stockpiles are greatly depleted from shipping them to Israel and Ukraine and using them up in this war. We've had to move them from other stations around the world, South Korea and Japan, to get them into the region during this war. We're greatly depleted on our Patriot missile defense systems, all of this stuff. So this narrative that we are giving them a break by giving them the extensions and the ceasefire is not the real reason for the extensions at all. Every time that there is a major update in terms of the negotiations, Trump says Iran is basically caved on nuclear. They've agreed to give up their enriched uranium. They've agreed to open the strait. Yet every time weeks go by after these statements are made and the strait is still closed and the nuclear enrichment is still at the same place it was. They are not giving up their enriched uranium. The Iranians have had the same position for over a year now, as negotiations have gone on between the two countries over the last year, from the 12-day war to now to in between. The Iranians' position on their nuclear enrichment has been the exact same. They are not willing to budge on it. They are not willing to give up all enrichment. They view it as their sovereignty. They equate it with their sovereignty. They basically say it's the pride of their nation that they were able to achieve these scientific feats. This is their. You would know that if you read Dropside News, you know what they are saying about this. So, and you would also know they haven't changed their position. Iran, this whole time, their demands have stayed the exact same. As the United States is claiming that Iran is capitulated, Iran has been making clear in every public statement, in every interview with Dropsite News, that that's just not true. They have not budged on these demands. That's why we haven't seen a deal. You would think back in like April and early May, when the Trump administration is claiming that Iran caved on all these major things, and they're on the verge of caving, and they're begging for mercy, you would think if that were the case, we would have a deal by now. That's the obvious conclusion you would draw. If the United States had forced Iran to their knees, as Pete Hegseth claims, and gotten them to cave on everything, then not only would Iran have caved by now, we would have a deal by now, but also Iran wouldn't be going today, after the statement was made, to Fars news agency, their state-run media, and saying, no, we are, not only is this not true, but we're still demanding reparations. We still want a ceasefire in Lebanon. We are still demanding that we're able to have tolls in the strait. Like, this narrative that they're totally caving flies in the face of every public statement from them. It's just not, it's not reality. Now, that was what Trump said this morning on Truth Social, to which, again, Jeremy Scahill at Dropsite has done incredible reporting. Yesterday, this is what he put out. 20 hours ago now, he put out this on Twitter. It says, quote, Iranian official tells me that from Iran's perspective, there is a final draft of an MOU with the United States, but Iran has zero trust in Trump or the U.S. word, and can't rule out the chance of more U.S.-Israeli strikes. Therefore, Iran is proceeding cautiously on any official announcement. Quote, some voices on the Iranian side are concerned that President Trump may reconsider his position at the last moment, the official said. Quote, Trump needs to cultivate the image of a victor in the war. He added, quote, we cannot regard President Trump's decision as definitively finalized until the financial markets close at the end of this week. That's a reference to the fact that this administration seems to be timing their major announcements in this war to when the markets open and close in what seemed to be some sort of insider trading. Again, allegedly, some insider trading manipulations close to the White House. This is just allegations that have been made after patterns of when major announcements are made and when strikes happen throughout this war. Then Jeremy Scahill put out this morning, quote, this is what an Iranian official told me last night, anticipating that Trump would be making such an announcement like this one he just made on Truth Social. Iran has also warned Trump would likely mischaracterize the privately agreed terms to promote his, quote, victor narrative. And this is what Iran is saying this morning. From Dropsite News is relaying the Fars news agency, which is, again, Iran's state-run media, on Twitter this morning. It says, quote, this is Dropsite News, says, quote, new. Iran's state-linked Fars News said Trump's deal claims are, quote, a mix of truth and lies. Key terms are missing. Iran's IRGC-linked Fars news agency has pushed back sharply on Trump's Truth Social post, describing his claims about the potential deal as, quote, a mix of truth and lies in an attempt to project a fabricated victory. It cited sources saying that the actual agreement, structured as a, quote, commitment for commitment, is still in the final approval stages in Iran and no definitive decision has been made. Key distortions, per the source, are number one, the Hormuz Strait. Trump claimed Iran must open the strait with no tolls. The source says no such clause exists in the MOU. Iran has said it will open the strait after the blockade is lifted and on its own predetermined terms, which may include vessel monitoring, inspection, and security services. Number two, nuclear material. Trump claimed Iran will dismantle and destroy its nuclear material. The source says this claim is, quote, has no basis whatsoever and does not appear in the MOU. Key terms Trump omitted. Number one, $12 billion. The source says the most important clause in the agreement is the immediate release of $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets, which Trump did not mention. Iran will not enter any subsequent negotiating phase until this is paid. Number two, the Lebanon ceasefire. A full ceasefire in Lebanon is in accordance with Hezbollah's terms is also listed as a prerequisite. The source added that Iran is approaching an agreement with, quote, complete distrust in America, structured so that any violation triggers immediate countermeasures. And again, this is from Fars News, which is an IRGC-linked media agency. So what Trump said this morning was that the Strait of Hormuz will be totally reopened. Again, I'll continue in a second with that, but the importance is in the language there. And this has been consistent for the last couple of weeks, as it seems to have been accepted that Iran will retain control over the strait. So already that's a major blow to the United States. If we are already accepting the premise in these negotiations that it won't be Iran relinquishes control of the strait, it won't be the IRGC will remove their presence in the strait and allow for free trade. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that Iran will voluntarily open the strait. They will maintain control, but they will allow it to be open. And what Iran is saying is that they'll maintain a security presence in the strait. And they will do what they call vessel monitoring. So it's already seemingly accepted by the United States, and they're being careful with the language to not make this obvious. But it seems like what they're saying is that Iran will maintain control of the strait after this war is over. They're trying to frame it in a way where that's not obvious, but that does seem to be what the language implies. And that is already a major blunder for the United States. That means Iran has gained territorial control in the region. They've gained influence in the region, and they are emboldened in the region. Because what does this mean for the future? This means that any future attacks by America or Israel necessarily have to account for the fact that Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz again. And it's now easier than before to do so. They have a military presence there that they are claiming as permanent. So this is the establishment of deterrence by the Iranians, and that is why they are so unwilling to give it up, because now this is deterrence for future attacks. As it's become clear that the regime is not likely going to be toppled, they are planning for the future, and this now is being used as future deterrence for the Iranians to prevent an attack from Iran to prevent future attacks from Israel or America as we go on here. And this is deterrence that now those two countries will have to consider before attacking Iran again. That's the point. And that's why it's a major blunder for the United States and Israel. It's that plus the fact that now Iran controls a fifth of the world's energy. They're trying to make that very unclear, but that is what that language implies. It's not relinquished control of, it's open. That's important to note there. Not just for now, but for the future. It's important to keep that in mind. That's something that the United States will always have to consider before conducting more military operations in Iran. So that's the latest on the Strait of Hormuz. We also have this nuclear issue. In this Truth Social post, Trump basically implies that Iran has agreed to allow the United States to fly in, use our military and our tools to dig up the enriched uranium, as he calls it, the nuclear dust, from underneath the rubble at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. And in coordination with both Iran and the IAEA, he's basically saying that Iran is going to allow the U.S. military, after all this, after the tensions and the war over the last 3 months, you're expecting that the U.S. military is just going to be simply allowed to fly in, land on the soil of Iran, and dig up the enriched uranium and leave with it without any pushback at all? That's what Trump's basically implying there. And Iran, again, responded by saying that's totally not true. That's not part of the MOU. What's involved with this memorandum of understanding, the whole point of it, this is ridiculous. Trump claiming that this MOU is a nuclear deal is just disconnected. The MOU, the point of it, is to extend the ceasefire for 60 days to make time to to negotiate a comprehensive nuclear deal, which is what needs to happen. Some nuclear deal is not going to be worked out through negotiations with the Gulf states, or I should say with negotiations between the United States and Iran through the intermediaries of the Gulf states. That takes in-person negotiations with experts from both sides, with international agencies like the IAEA. This would take a comprehensive deal. Just the idea that we're making a couple phone calls and we're going to get Iran to cave after 3 months of war where they have not caved, to allowing the U.S. to come in and carve up their nuclear sites, that's just not realistic. And Iran has made that clear. Iran came out today and said that's nowhere in the MOU. The whole point of the MOU is so that we have 60 days to work out a deal for the nuclear, specifically the nuclear deal. So they're not going to have a finalization on the nuclear issue with this random MOU draft agreement for 60 days. That's not the point of it. So that's just, and Iran says that's not even part of the deal. The part of the deal is to make 60 days to negotiate this further, not to come to a conclusion on it yet. So I don't even know what he's talking about there. Nobody seems to. But that's the latest on the nuclear issue as well. And there are a couple things that Trump omitted there. We read it there from Dropsite. The key points in this deal that Trump is omitting is, number one, the issue of payments to the Iranians, which Iran is still demanding. Iran is demanding at least the $12 billion in their frozen assets to be handed back to them, which the neocons here in the United States will never like because that will allow them to fund their military and revamp for a potential new round of fighting. They don't want and they perceive that as us giving back their assets. They perceive as us paying the Iranians. So they'll never accept that. The Israel lobby, the neocons, they'll never accept that. And they also are demanding reparations for the war. According to the New York Times, and this is an article from the Times of Israel reporting on this, the apparent MOU, the draft of the MOU, and this is something that Trump just omitted, is referencing a possible $300 billion post-war investment fund to aid Iran's reconstruction. This is from the Times of Israel. It says, quote, the draft memorandum of understanding being discussed by Iran and the U.S. references a post-war investment fund to support Tehran's post-war reconstruction and economic growth if a final deal is reached, the New York Times reports, citing an Iranian official and a diplomat involved in the talks. Two sources put the fund at $300 billion, though other officials involved in mediation would not confirm the amount, according to the report. Two diplomats briefed on the latest draft called it an international investment fund, which the United States would help facilitate in the event of a deal, the plan for which would be discussed during the initial 60-day negotiation period that the memorandum would kick off, the report says. So, and by the way, the report notes that the proposal appears to reflect an earlier idea floated by U.S. Mideast envoys Witkoff and Kushner, who are both real estate investors. So Trump in that Truth Social post he's made clear this whole time there will be no payment to Iran. Iran, on the other hand, is saying that in order to even forward negotiations to the next phase, we are demanding payments. Again, where is a deal in this? They are both still on their red lines. Iran is still demanding $300 billion in reparations for the war. And apparently even some diplomats in the United States, like Witkoff and Kushner, are saying, let's just do that. Now, if Trump actually went forward with paying the Iranians directly in this like $300 billion fund, this would be substantially worse than the way that they're portraying the JCPOA. They portray the JCPOA, the neocons do, as if Barack Obama literally flew pallets of U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Iranians. That's not true. That's just not what happened. They unfroze about $1.6 billion of Iran's frozen assets and they lifted sanctions on Iran and allowed them to trade with the rest of the world. And that, of course, brought in revenue for the Iranians. So the way they portrayed the JCPOA is that the United States and Barack Obama funneled your taxpayer money to Iran. That's not what happened. They unfroze Iran's assets and lifted sanctions. That was what actually happened with the JCPOA. What Trump would be doing here, $300 billion directly to Tehran, that would be actually funneling taxpayer money to the Iranians. So that would be ridiculous. And I don't understand how Trump could possibly pull that off and try and maintain this victor narrative. Because Trump complained about this too. They all did. That Obama was sending pallets of cash to the Iranians. Okay, you can't say that. You can't try and portray this as better than the JCPOA if you are literally sending taxpayer money, $300 billion, to the Iranians as some sort of reparation fund. So I don't know what this is like. This is signs of total loss. I mean, this is craziness that we're even considering that. Witkoff and Kushner seem to be considering that because we're like, let's just get out of this. So that's the latest on the whole funding part of this. Trump is still saying we're not funding them. Iran is demanding it in order to forward the negotiations. So again, we're at this point where we've been this entire time. We have no idea. The reason the neocons can't allow the Iranians to make any money is because that money will be used to rebuild their drone and missile programs and prepare for the next round of fighting and reestablish deterrence, because the missiles are another piece of deterrence, specifically against Israel, also to the United States by their ability to hit our bases, but specifically to Israel because they can hit Israel itself. They can hit the actual mainland of Israel. Now, this goes along with the issue of the tolls. Trump is claiming in this Truth Social post that Iran won't be allowed to charge tolls, and he, again, implies as if Iran has agreed to this. Iran has not agreed to this. In fact, they're already trying to find workarounds for this. Yesterday, I believe it was floated that instead of officially charging tolls, one of the workarounds they might do to get it by the United Nations, for example, is they're going to charge an environmental fee, and they'll claim it's for the environment, and that way they can still be making money on what are essentially tolls under a different name. These are the workarounds they're already trying to do to still maintain the ability to charge tolls. Iran said today, after the Trump Truth Social post, that was never part of the deal, that we can't charge tolls, and we still will have a presence in the Strait. So there's really no clear idea here as to what Trump is thinking or what he is saying or what any of his information is based on, because it's obviously not based on the public statements of the Iranians over the last few months. Again, if we are to believe that the Iranians this whole time have been begging for mercy, begging to come to the table and negotiate, they basically caved. They're brought to their knees by the United States military. If we are to believe that, and if we are to say that they weren't lying in March and April when they said that, they were saying it all month in March and April, that the Iranians were begging for a deal. We're extending the ceasefire 2 weeks because the Iranians begged for it. If we are to say that they weren't lying there, then we would have a deal by now. You can't simultaneously say they were telling the truth then, and the Iranians were begging for a deal, and we also don't have a deal right now. If they were begging for a deal back then, we would have a deal by now, obviously. If they were willing to cave on all these major points of contention, why are they coming out every time Trump says a deal is close and saying, no, none of this is true? It makes no sense if you believe the U.S. narrative here. It makes no sense. So that's the latest on that. We also have to talk about the Israeli factor in all of this. The Israelis, this whole time, during these negotiations, have been pressuring the United States to go back to war. Netanyahu has, and the Israeli government has been trying to scuttle negotiations in every way, shape, and form. We'll read this here from Capital and Empire here. They had an exclusive report yesterday that Israel is privately pressuring Donald Trump to kill the negotiators in Iran. This is a frequent activity of the Israeli government. They did this with Hamas, if you'll recall, back on September 10th. Or maybe September 9th, early September, in Doha, Qatar. They killed the Hamas negotiating team. They do this all the time. They killed the negotiators in Iran during the 12-day war. They killed the scientists and negotiators. They do this to scuttle negotiations so that war is the only option. I'll get into this piece in a second, but here's what you need to understand. The Israelis don't want peace. The Israelis, the last thing that Netanyahu wants, the last thing the Israeli government wants, is peace in the Middle East. Why? Because they've had a doctrine since the 80s of breaking up every major country in the Middle East that could possibly threaten their expansion and their goals for regional hegemony into little tribes, basically. They call it tribes with flags. They want a bunch of little tribes with flags that none of which could, on their own, threaten the expansion of Israel, threaten the project of Greater Israel, and making Israel into a regional superpower. This is the goal of Israel. This has been the goal since the 80s. You can go back to the 80s with all the writings back then by some of the Israelis. You can go back to the 1996 Clean Break Memo. This has been the doctrine, the plan of the whole Likud party this whole time, Benjamin Netanyahu since the 90s, to basically use the U.S. military and U.S. weapons and U.S. money and U.S. troops to forward this agenda, to break up Iraq and Syria and Libya and now Iran and the proxies of Iran, so that Israel can expand into southern Lebanon, which they are doing right now. expand into the West Bank and Gaza, and to the Golan Heights in Syria, and do so without any pushback from Iran, primarily, any pushback from the other Iran-aligned governments, like Syria was, and without the Iran-backed proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. And this has been their project for a long time. In an effort to forward the negotiations, the United States pressured the Israelis to make a ceasefire with Lebanon. And they did. They made a ceasefire with the Lebanese government, which is distinct from Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the militia force in the southern half of Lebanon. The Lebanese government is basically a powerless government that has no real authority over dictating Hezbollah's activities in the south. And Israel is still attacking southern Lebanon. They're attacking what they're claiming are Hezbollah outfits in southern Lebanon. In reality, they're forcing everyone in the southern half of the country below the Litani River, which is basically a third of the country, out and north over the Litani River. They're forcing everyone out of their homes. They're destroying everything in sight. They've killed over 1,000 civilians. And they have said openly, Bezalel Smotrich said, we will do to southern Lebanon what we did to Gaza. This is blatant. They are doing it very openly, very brazenly. They're not trying to hide it. They are forcing everyone out of their homes, telling them they can't come back. And they are taking the land. They are stealing southern Lebanon as we speak. They just recently, or just today, Netanyahu announced that the Israeli government will now occupy 70% of Gaza. They are actively engaged in these land grabs, very provocative land grabs that are a direct effort to scuttle peace talks between the United States and Iran, because they know Iran will not sit by and let that happen. This is the point. They want Iran to not make a deal so that Israel has an excuse to go back into Iran and finish the job and overthrow the regime, because that is the goal. Israel said at the beginning of this war, Netanyahu did, that the main point of this war was regime change. He says Trump has just gifted him what he has spent 40 years of his career looking for, which is a regime change war in Iran. He tried to get George W. Bush to do it, and Dick Cheney tried to push Bush to do it on behalf of Netanyahu. Bush said no. He tried to get Obama to do it. Obama said no. He tried to get Biden to do it. Biden said no. Trump has gifted Netanyahu what he's wanted for 40 plus years. A regime change in Iran, a regime change war in Iran. And now that Trump is looking for peace, Netanyahu is trying to look for any way to stop this peace from happening. He's doing this by trying to annex the southern Lebanon. He's doing it by trying to take 70% of Gaza. These are very provocative, intentional moves to scuttle negotiations. The key factor you need to understand about this war is Israel. Israel wants this war. They do not want a peace deal. And they've already made it clear. I urge everybody, please, to read the Israeli press. Read some articles from the last few days as peace has been floated, and read the ones in the next few days. As the peace deal has been floated, the Israeli press has made it very clear that if this happens, if the United States reaches a deal with Iran, this would be the end of Netanyahu's career. This would be the biggest blunder of his career. It is in Netanyahu's political interests to further a war in Iran. This has been his goal for decades, openly. And he was furious. There have been multiple reported phone calls between Trump and Netanyahu where Netanyahu is furious at Donald Trump for even considering a peace deal. Netanyahu's tools in the American media, on Fox News and in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post, are all saying that Trump should not make a deal with the Iranians. To make a deal with the Iranians would be a grave mistake for the Trump administration. They are doing everything to pressure him out of a deal. So this is the factor you need to understand. The Israelis want anything but a peace deal. They want continued war. They want to ideally overthrow the regime and basically have a puppet or a failed state, either one, in charge of Iran. They want Iran to basically be a failed state like Libya, like Syria, that can't threaten Israel's expansionist project. That's what you need to understand. On that same note, let's read this exclusive from yesterday from Capital and Empire. It says, quote, Israel is privately lobbying the Department of War to assassinate Iran's lead negotiator, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and restart the war with a new round of strikes targeting the country's oil infrastructure, according to a classified report circulating within the U.S. intelligence community this week. Israeli officials are aggressively trying to pull the U.S. away from negotiations and back into war, arguing to senior Trump administration officials that another round of strikes against Iran's oil infrastructure will generate enough economic devastation and unrest to trigger regime change in Tehran. U.S. sources directly familiar with the assessment told Capital and Empire. Even while making that argument, Israeli officials have simultaneously downplayed the likely impact renewed war would have on the global energy markets, insisting internally that Iranian retaliation against Gulf states and regional infrastructure would remain economically manageable. So Israel is blatantly and openly trying to pressure Trump away from the negotiating table. So let me ask everyone out there, all these supporters of Israel out there that say Israel's our greatest ally, Trump seems to be clearly under the mindset that a peace deal would be ideal for the United States. They are desperately in this administration, based on all the available media reporting. And this, if you're being honest, you will admit this. They are clearly trying to find an off-ramp here. They understand it is not in our interest to restart this war. They clearly understand that. They don't want this. They see the polling on this war. It's the most unpopular war in modern history. The economic effects are devastating. There's a global economic crisis over this, the energy crisis. Gas prices are through the roof as we're heading into a midterm election, so the political incentives are not in favor of starting this war again. So all this, Trump's approval rating is at all-time lows. It's in the low 30s, possibly upper 20s. This has had terrible political and economic effects here in the United States. It is clearly not in the Trump administration's interest or the country's interest to continue this war. So for everyone out there who's a massive fan of Israel and is a massive Israel supporter, how would you characterize this behavior from the Israelis? Intentionally trying to sabotage negotiations that the Trump administration is engaged in. Actively trying to get Trump administration officials to believe that this war could just be, that a regime change could just be enacted with a swift strike, after we already know this is what they told Trump back in February. New York Times had a very major piece reporting that Netanyahu and the Mossad chief went to the Oval Office, or went to the Situation Room, and told Trump that it would be quick and easy to overthrow the regime. It wasn't. They lied to him blatantly. They tried to convince him that the people would rise up and take the government. Trump bought that, and now we're in this war. That hasn't happened. Now the same people, the Israelis that lied us into this war, are coming back and saying that if we just kill the negotiators and start the war again and hit their oil infrastructure, then the regime is just going to crash and burn. What could you call this other than trying to manipulate our government? What could you call this other than trying to get our government to do something blatantly in the interest of a foreign country? We have figures in American politics making this exact same case. Our supposed representatives, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. We read it out on our last episode in response to the rumors of a potential peace deal, made it very clear where his concern is. He said that if the Iranian regime survives and is emboldened by their acquisition of the Strait of Hormuz, and if they have ballistic missiles still, this is a real nightmare for Israel. Never mentioned there at all is the devastation that has happened to the United States because of this war, the economic and political devastation that the United States has endured due to this war. Never mentioned once in that post from Lindsey Graham, where he's so deeply concerned about the effect it'll have on Israel's ability to expand their borders, never once mentioned is the 13 American lives that have been spent on this war. The 13 American lives that have been lost in this pointless, reckless, insane war that Lindsey Graham full-throatedly supported. Never mentioned once. But what is mentioned is a little mini essay about how Israel's ability to expand into southern Lebanon and into Gaza and the West Bank will be threatened by the fact that the Iranian regime survives. Lindsey Graham could care less about the Americans that have died for this war, or the money that's been spent in this war, or the economic cost or the political cost to the Republican Party in this war. Any of this stuff. He could care less about any of that because that's all American. He could care less about this country. He could care less about the people of South Carolina, his state, paying $5, $6 a gallon for gas. That is of no interest to him. What is of interest to him is the effect that Hezbollah has on northern Israel. The effect that Hezbollah has on Israel's ability to acquire southern Lebanon. This is where Lindsey Graham's mind is. He's totally not concerned with the concerns of America, the domestic population here. He could care less about any of that. What he does care about, though, is furthering Israel's influence in the Middle East and using the U.S. military and our money and our weapons to do so. That's what he's concerned about. So, the U.S. representative. It's like, these people are a joke, and they are a disgrace to this country. Frankly, they're traitors. They are traitors to the country. They care about one thing and one thing only, that is Israel and Israel's interests. That's it. That's the latest on the U.S. reaction to the peace deals. We're getting updates as I speak here. Again, senior Iranian officials are coming out and saying that Trump, one of them says that the announcement from Trump today reflects his wishes, not the reality. So it's very unclear where these negotiations lie. The Iranians are basically denying everything Trump said in this Truth Social post this morning, and Trump is saying that a deal is basically imminent. So this has been, as the theme has been this entire war, the Trump administration is looking for an off-ramp, and the Iranians aren't letting us have it. That's basically what the situation is at the moment. But that is where we'll end it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to go down below this video and hit like and subscribe here on YouTube to stay updated on all the latest with these negotiations, as well as everything else in the news. Also, if you could please go to my Instagram, X, Spotify, and Substack and give all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.